Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the ManOn2nd podcast. My name is Eric Wiedeke, one of your regular hosts. As always, I'm joined by Joe Frisaro, and today we do have a special guest. We have Christina DeNicola of MLB.com, the Marlins writer. How you doing today, Christina?
Good, and you? It's kind of going to be interesting experiment because Joe and I have known each other for 10 years, and we've had plenty of baseball discussions, but we've never had it recorded. I don't believe. So.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Well,
that
there you
makes
go.
sense. Yeah, yeah. Eric, I'll introduce Christina. As she noted, known Christina a very long time since she came out of UM. When I was the beat writer at MLB.com, they gave us interns, which now have a fancier name, associate reporters. And Christina, I have a pretty distinguished list of interns, and Christina will tell you she is my second favorite intern, and Christina tell who's number one.
David Villavicencio, who I believe most recently, but not at the moment, was a University of Miami sports info director, and now he's gone on to bigger and better things.
Yeah. And
Okay.
yeah, so it's kind of a
He's
running
also a
joke that
DJ, so
yeah, and he's a
I can't
DJ,
compete
believe
with
it or not.
that.
Yeah, so Christina has kind of been a running joke forever that she knows that she was never going to be favorite because David was always going to be favorite, but she's second favorite, and it's a pretty good list we have. And I tell you though, Christina, Maria Torres, who is the Nationals beat writer for the Athletic, is moving fast. We love Maria, and Alden Gonzalez is part of my tree. Uh, Tom Green, who's at AL.com in Alabama, he covers Auburn. There are a few. I'm missing some, but I loved all of them. So but Christina, replaced me. I had a nice 18-year, 19 season run on the Marlins, and was happy to pass the torch to Christina, who's done a fine job. And you can catch her work at Marlins.com, MLB.com, and let's get us into the show, Eric.
Absolutely. So the first thing, obviously, the big thing for a lot of Marlins fans is uh, Jonathan India wins Rookie of the Year. Trevor Rogers comes in second place, only receives one vote. Christina did have a vote for Rookie of the Year, and I'm going to let her, talk about who she chose. But the most important thing is with these awards, I know there's plenty of different lenses that you can kind of view the races through. What lens did you kind of use most prominently when making this decision?
Right. So this one was a very difficult one. I spent quite a long time just going through different stats, and it's not just even stats. I think narratives as well, storylines. So this was, I literally waited almost to the last possible minute because I saw Trevor every start. I didn't see India play every game. I didn't see Dylan Carlson and the other guys that were included play every game, but at the end of the day, the big thing that stood out for me, and I think probably for a lot of the voters, since there was only one first place vote for Trevor, is just, Jonathan India played 150 of the 162 games. And there's something to be said about that. And even, we'll probably talk about it in a little bit, but with Randy Arozarena, the same thing. He was there all year, even though, of course, Wander Franco is a flashy name and could end up being, or should be, probably, the superstar of all the rookies this year. So that played a big role in it, just the 150 games for India. And it's interesting, I spoke to Trevor last week for a different story, and he kind of brought it up without even me mentioning it. It's just he understood that being away for a month, he lost some momentum, that probably would play into the race. And I believe it probably, it did.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, a really good points Christina's mentioning, and Christina and yeah, I'm still an active BBWA member. I wasn't around the team every day like Christina, so I didn't have any votes this year, and same thing, I didn't have the volume, to justify having one of the major award votes. But there is, I want to ask Christine about her process because in years past when I did have votes, whether it's MVP, the toughest is manager of the year because it's so subjective and front offices play so much. But when you're doing a player award, whether it's Cy Young, MVP, or Rookie of the Year, and it's a little tougher now with the COVID and the restrictions and Zoom. In years past, when I had my vote, I know I would try to talk to writers from the other teams. I'd talk to as many scouts or industry sources. I try to gather as much information on the player, as well as try to find out or put your eyeballs on the favorites. And something to keep in mind as a BBW, Christian, when did you find out you had Rookie of the Year? Because you may not have known day one. You may not have known till June.
Yeah, not at all. It was probably maybe within like the last month, maybe last month and a half. So obviously the whole landscape had changed by then because, and if you look back at it, Trevor was easily the front runner those first two, maybe in the first half of the season because he had back to back rookie of the months. So I think I even joked at some point, earlier on or whenever, like, oh, this will be easy. Like Trevor will be the runaway winner, and then the landscape changed so much.
Yeah, and that's an important point because you're condensing and you're trying to, and we hope that the access gets more and moving forward as we get hopefully more under control with the virus and access to these players and these people because there's a lot of responsibility as a BBWA member. You don't these rewards, you don't want to come across as the homer. You want to be as objective. You want to use the statistical data and as well as the anecdotal data that is sometimes just as valuable to find does this player make that team better. And I just got some numbers because I do think and George Ebro of El Nuevo Herald had the other because each market gets 2 votes for every award. So Christina and George, and I thought to commend them for that. And for I'm kind of was under the belief, Christina too. If it's a tie, I'll probably vote for my local player. If the things kind of equal. But she did note the numbers and just some things with Jonathan India and Christina knows it's and our followers here know of ManOn2nd. I have a little bit more of a Florida lens than the specific Marlins all the time. And Jonathan's from down here, and he went to UF, and we're real proud of him. And when I interviewed him, he's a great kid, and I hope to get him on the podcast at some point as we move forward. 3.9 WAR, but he qualified. Among National League position players, he was 19th in F WAR, Fangraphs WAR. Ahead of 20th was Mookie Betts, Joey Votto was 21, Javi Baez 22, and Trevor Story 23. So if you want to use WAR, he more than put himself. He's a top 20 WAR player of National League position players. And among NL qualifying second basemen, he was 4th. Trey Turner was 1, Jay Cronenworth of the Padres 2, Ozzy Albies 3, and then India 4, followed by Javi Baez 5. So he's more than held his own statistically. And I think this is important too to mention with Trevor. And it doesn't mean that Trevor isn't his equal or better as a talent. But it is Rookie of the Year. And Trevor was noted for the moments that he was at his finest. He was, like Christina noted, 2-time Rookie of the Month, and he was a National League All-Star. And which he was duly rewarded for his accomplishments in the first half. But Eric, in our previous show, we kind of touched on this. We weren't really surprised by the outcome. I probably am a little surprised, though, Christina, he only got 1 first place vote. I thought that there might be more. I thought Jonathan would win, but you never really know how it's going to break.
Oh yeah, I think I even before the results were announced, I think I had texted a colleague saying, "Uh-oh, what if my vote decided?" Because I thought it would be closer too, honestly. But I think what's interesting because the broadcast mentioned it before the results were announced that maybe the recency bias would play into account, the second half, and I think it doesn't hurt because if you look at India's numbers, the first 2 months were subpar, but some of that could maybe go toward the spider tack pitching controversy. Also, early on in the season, offenses are kind of, the weather's cool, offenses are cool down. He also had never played in the big leagues before. He wasn't even invited to big league camp. So that goes back to what I'm mentioning with the narratives as well. It's just interesting dissecting into those different elements too for each of those players.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did kind of touch on that, and it's an interesting thought experiment that I kind of had come up with while thinking about this. I'm almost of the impression that, and you brought it up a little bit, what both players kind of did down the stretch and the recency bias. I mean, I'm almost of the impression that maybe India still would have won, but had Trevor's season been flip flopped, where maybe he kind of struggles in the first couple of months of the season, but he ends the way that he started, it'd be, at the very least, I think, a much closer race than it ended up being ultimately.
Well, and it's interesting. Trevor, obviously, still a great year, right? 2.64
Definitely.
ERA, high, strikeout totals. But it's interesting, and I think it's before I would say his innings were being extremely, dissected, monitored. You had the back spasms, then was away for a month. But his last quality start, I believe, was June 15th. So the last time he threw 6 innings. And then over his last 11 starts, a 3.86 ERA. And that was even before the All-Star game. That was before the issues. Unfortunately, he had to go, and family's so much more important.
Right.
So it was almost like a span of 3 months where he wasn't. I mean, it was not sustainable. Likely, not everyone's Jose Fernandez, which Joe and I saw his, rookie season and stuff. But
yeah, I think it's important to know. I do think at the end of the day, 133 and a third or whatever it was exactly innings pitched. Jose Fernandez in 13 when he won, I believe, was at 175 innings. And just so the listeners know, to qualify for an ERA title, you have to throw at least 100, start at least 162 innings, which winds up with the amount of games in the regular season. So he that's why you don't see him on the qualifying list if you were to look among qualifiers among ERA or WAR. And I don't dislike WAR. I think it's a very good measure. It just jumps at you, and I think it is important at the BBWA and these votes. We don't just rely entirely on it. Otherwise, then just Fangraphs could pick it, and just you do 1 through 10 and 1 through 3, and whoever won is your winner. But Sandy Alcantara had a 4.2 F WAR, and Trevor Rogers had a 4.2 F WAR. Do you think those two had the same value for the Miami Marlins in 2021? And so just keep that in perspective. And again, it's no knock on a player because we love Trevor. I remember when they drafted him and just, the interactions I have with him are always, he's a great kid, great upside, great pitcher. And we're hoping they're Cy Youngs in the future for him. But I just think if you're a voter, you got to be consistent with your process. And when Christina moves forward, it may flip next year. There might be a Marlins rookie or a Marlins player who is rewarded for volume over a flashier, shorter distance, workload, and which leads us, I think, let's go over to the AL, because to me that rookie of the year is Randy Arozarena based on the process, but the best rookie is Juan Franco.
Definitely, and that's And also, I think, as I was teasing you about Joe, my mom's favorite player during the postseason, she loves his name.
Yes.
Like, how do you just, like, Arozarena just rolls off the tongue?
Yeah, and Christina is a Miami native. What do you think? I mean, we saw him; he's wearing the Cuban shirt. He has his child there. What do you think he means to our Cuban community down here in South Florida? And for him to win that award, and I know he's across the state of Tampa, but what do you think he means just to our market when you see someone like Arozarena winning?
Well, huge. I mean, you mentioned one of our colleagues, Jorge, who him and another one, Giordano, Cuban. They cater to their not market, I don't want to say, but they're writing about Cuban ball players, and the interest is there. Obviously, Miami is very diverse, and Cuban population is probably, I would assume, the majority. Tampa is got a very, like the whole debate on who has the better Cuban sandwich. But no, I mean, it goes without saying how important it is. And the timing was remarkable because I believe that was right November 15th when they were doing the Patria y Vida. I hope I didn't butcher that. But yeah, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something that's been missing for the Marlins, probably for almost their whole franchise or organization, other than maybe Levon, is the Cuban ball player, and obviously Jose. But right, but for how many seasons have there been now? It seems like that's kind of been the market that hasn't been tapped to its potential, or like that's
a story for another day because we had the Mesa brothers, whether they pan out or not.
Right.
But that's the hope there. And while we stay on awards before we move on, the manager of the years were last night. American League, we saw Kevin Cash of the Rays winning, and National League was kind of a no-brainer with Gabe Kapler. And just kind of your thoughts, both of you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when you look at specifically what Kevin Cash was able to do, and he's got one of the toughest decisions, or one of the tougher jobs in the AL as manager of the Rays. Not necessarily because the Rays are a less talented roster. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite. They've got a tremendous roster. Um, but on a decision making level, night to night, they've got the most bullpen innings in the MLB by far. And so to constantly be able to kind of manage that and do that as effectively as he does, I think you know easily deserving of the manager of the year award there.
Well, it's interesting. Joe alluded to it earlier, just how difficult manager of the year would be to vote on because of the
Yeah,
blurring of the lines between front office and manager. How much are those his decision? Are they pre-made? How many times now you see players that have their little sheets, their little cheat
right,
sheets. Well, the Rays know, I guess. The, but I mean, that one obviously the easy one was Gabe Kapler with the Giants, of course, because no one expected that. But that's once again also an organization where the blurring of the lines, which it's every organization to whatever extent, but it's interesting, trying to vote on that because you don't really truly know how
right.
much of that is the
I
manager.
mean, I had the manager year. Oh, I didn't last year. I had the MVP, but I would have voted Donnie. Last year, and but that would have been so much of that was culture. You're dealing with a COVID culture. You're dealing with 19 positive tests within the first week of the season. 11 bullpen arms were taken from you in just a week in, and then somehow you held it together in a 60-game season to go. That's why I think he kind of, he held, the steadiness and the even hand to not let what should have been, by all accounts, and a disastrous year. And then I think what did they have, like 63 players, and that they used in a 60-game season that were active on their roster. It's that made that decision. But you really, it does come down to the manager. It comes down to, well, yeah, Gabe Kapler under 7 games. They were expected to finish third or fourth place. Obviously, he gets that. But what's your criteria other than a win one loss? I remember when I had manager year votes. I was looking at ejections. I was looking at, I was trying to think challenges, how many challenges you won. I was trying to find anything extra other than the anecdotal stuff, talking to you know people in Atlanta about Brian Snitker, who was a candidate at the time, and or somebody like that, or Dave Roberts in L.A. because I think he gets penalized a bit for their roster being so good. Um, I think before we move on to another tab, I think it has something to do too with keep this in mind. The Rays way. I mean, we talked about the Astros way, where you have ex Astros GMs that are around elsewhere, but you got Andrew Friedman in L.A. You got James Click in Houston. You got Hein Bloom in Boston. You have that blueprints out there, and Kevin Cash is working with it. And like you mentioned, Eric, very astutely, it's one thing to bullpen a 60-game season, but to bullpen 162 and you lost Nick Anderson, you're getting value out of Adam Connolly. You're finding along the way. You change your closer every 2 weeks, and then you go, and arguably you had a very tough break happen to you at Boston on that weird ground rule double thing that cost you momentum and ultimately a short series in Boston that cost them their year. But what what you have to do with that many arms, it was pretty remarkable how Cash, and they basically ran away with the East. They dominated that division.
Well, and it's interesting because the Marlins have had, well, now it'll be four, I think, with Lewis Head, former Rays arms coming over. And I always liked asking, and I even asked Kim Ang this too, toward the end of the season when the team was in St. Petersburg. Just what is it, this maybe Rays blueprint? And what's interesting with the different pitchers was they didn't necessarily go into the mechanics or whatnot, but they went into the mental side about how the Rays are very good about like boosting confidence. Like you have this stuff, or like if you do this and that, like just trust in it. It was less about that's what stuck with them was the mental aspect, how much the Rays are good with that.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that you brought up Lewis Head because that's kind of the next thing that we wanted to touch on is the hot stove season. And I know that expectations, particularly for the Marlins, are kind of all over the place. I do think just from a narrative perspective, I think it's pretty funny when you have everyone, expecting the flashy move to be the first thing, and it's Lewis Head for a player to be named later. And I believe Lewis Head is going to be a good arm for the Marlins. I just think, optically it's pretty funny.
Well, and it's interesting because last week was the GM meetings. I didn't get to go, but a few of my colleagues were there. And so I had sent some questions to Mark Feinsand to ask him. And one of the things I did ask was, obviously there's all the talk about multiple bats. What about a closer? And she kind of segued into the bats are the priority, but we do need to address the depth of the bullpen. And that's the first thing we did within a week. And I think just with the CBA uncertainty, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, we've seen some signings, we've seen some trades, but like how that'll affect things leading up to it. So yeah, I don't, yeah, it's not this, the splashy, big free agent signing that people want, but I mean, you do need to improve the, as the club saw this year. The bullpen did a good job, but like there has been some turnover from it, and it's going to be another, you hope, 162 game season.
Yeah, and it's funny, like Eric's talking about the optics. This obviously is a big offseason for the Marlins, Christina specifically, and we know there's a reality and then there's the perception. And whenever someone in the front office says we're kind of going for it or we're all in, people kind of look at all in means they're going to get Correa, Seager to battle out who's the shortstop and who's the second baseman, and then they're going to sign, what's his name? Who's the best reliever? I'm drawing a blank. The closer from Iglesias, whatever.
Iglesias,
yeah. That they're just going to load up with $300 million players and doesn't realize that all in is, a commitment to going for it rather than, yes, they went for it in 2002. It blew up. It wasn't a guarantee, but their focus, they were going for it in 15 and in 16 they were going for it. It just those trades. That's what. And then 17 after Jose passed, that trading Luis Castillo for Dan Straley was a going for it move. That I think that we just think that you have to just spend top dollar if you don't get a 200 million. And I've been pretty open about who I think should be their top priority, and this is Nick Castellanos, because I think it addressed their biggest need, which is power, threat, middle of the lineup, who has the type of game I believe fits for this ballpark. And they did obviously have preliminary conversations. But Christina, what do you think realistically is in line? Because I think everyone thinks if they don't reverse 95 losses and make them 95 wins to get to the postseason, then this thing, that just doesn't really happen. So what is the realistic middle or direction that you think they should be going?
Right. I think this is where we kind of agree quite a bit on. So I thought it was interesting. So one of the things I did have asked to Kim was about qualifying offers, if that would kind of be a deterrent to getting guys like the Castellanos, and her answer was no. So obviously, like multiple bats would imply, one guy's not going to make a difference. So like Castellanos, the free agent market for catchers isn't, catching is very, very weak across the majors, probably even minors. Would have to come via trade, and then another bat. It's just got to be. You be sensible, but also be making the right moves, right? You don't need to, like we said, we saw in 2012 how that turned out, trying to beat, big, Miami Marlins unveiling, and that kind of blew up in their faces. Who else? I had some lists on there, but yeah, I mean,
yeah, the Avisel Garcias, the
exactly,
Escobars,
complementary piece, because you also have, you saw progress made by a Jazz Chisholm Jr., Lewin Diaz. Jesus Sanchez, Brian De Cruz came on strong toward the end. Then you've got like JJ Bleday, who is, whether it's quickly making people forget about it the year or whatnot, but more the player that everyone thought he was when they drafted him. And so it's interesting too to know, because they were a 95 loss team, but there were a lot of those early injuries, and then it snowballed, and they were kind of in that weird in between place where they had the prospects, but they weren't ready for the big leagues, and some of them were forced up there because of where the injuries were. There wasn't depth, like Jose Devers had to come up, right? Brian Anderson missed twice with 60-day IL stints, and Garrett Cooper and Eliezer Hernandez, but Sixto Sanchez was already hurt, and Edward Cabrera was hurt to begin the year. And so it was a 95 loss team, but I'm not saying there's going to be like a crazy turnaround necessarily for 2022, but they should be. I would, with the right moves, at least 500 or hovering with it if that pitching staff stays healthy. So you don't, she even said, I guess last week when I had them ask her about like would a shortstop, big name free agent like Correa or someone be something that she mentioned that Miguel Rojas, with him signing his extension, even though he said, he'd happily move. Like that kind of seems like they've got bigger areas of need, which would be, outfield, obviously, like a Castellanos would be a perfect fit. And I was just rambling.
No. Those are valid, and that's where I think the expectation should be. If they stun us with Chris Bryant and
Right.
more, I mean that's one thing. But I don't. We've also seen risks there. They had a $300 million player in Stanton, and if he goes down, and when he went down, that really put them in a bind. So if you're going to get a Correa with history of back issues, and I know he's still young, but if you're going to touch that, if you're going to go into Lindor money for your shortstop, uh, this market can't sustain any regression, or they need that player at the top of his game, and if not, you're in big trouble.
Right.
What do
And
you
you've
think?
got it. Well, I was before, just to
Go
go
ahead.
off of that note, because it kind of ties back into the Rays blueprint, right? Is you kind of, if someone goes down, someone else can fill in adequately. So that's honestly what a team like the Marlins should operate, but with obviously a little bit more, you would assume, like payroll opportunities and flexibility, you know. But the Rays should be the blueprint for a club like an organization like the Marlins.
No, I'm in total agreement. That's part of what I think they kind of gotten torn, because they kind of want to be a big splash. Let's get a high profile guy, and then they really need to operate more with it's the team concept. Fill in the blanks, like you said. Joey Wendell, is Joey Wendell a star on 29 other teams? I don't know, but he's pretty effective on Tampa Bay's team. He's always in the right position. He always makes the right play, and he's always prepared for a clutch at bat, and he comes through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Those type of players, they're not going to, maybe sell 20 more thousand tickets a game. But I think that collectively, when you have everybody's capable of helping you win, that culture of 26 players win a game for one game for you is really kind of a nice blueprint, rather than counting on Tatis and Machado, because the Padres are the other side. They go all in on the players, and they didn't finish 500. But um, Christine, what do you think should go with Sandy? Because this, I think, ties in. If you want to make a real run at a Castellanos, or let's say get three players that are 100, $50 million players, two players like that, and maybe a couple of bullpen arms, that maybe you're going 120 million up in payroll. You do have 3 years of control of Sandy. There's not the urgency to sign him. So what do? You want to sign him, but does it make more sense to sign him and eat up payroll that you might be able to allocate towards free agents that, or take on salary that might help you get where you want to go within the next 3 years?
Right, and that's why I agree. It's interesting the whole. I think it's almost like baseball. Why this narrative that if someone has, obviously he's had more than 1 year of success, but like someone hits arbitration, like oh, immediately sign into extension. Like you still, that's obviously once again going back to the CBA, we don't know how things are going to change, but the club still has control over him for a few more years. Like you could, not like go to his representative and say like, hey, we're going to try to allocate some of this money to get the club those bats so that he's not finishing with 15 losses in a season and only 1 point whatever runs of support, which is like he's the DeGrom of the Marlins. There's always like the ace usually gets shortchanged, but obviously I guess then you also work under the assumption that he's going to have an even better year next year, so you want to sign him when you can, but it is just his first year of arbitration eligibility, so it doesn't need to be like, if we don't sign him this winter to an extension, it's over. Like he's not going to stay at Marlin. That's not how it works.
Right, and it's such a fine line that you need to draw, because as Joe mentioned, we were talking about free agency on the last pod, and he mentioned, Castellanos, a player like that wants to win. You can go out and get a Jock Peterson that won 2 championships in the last 2 years. At what point is it the balancing act of, and I know that perception isn't always reality, but across the league, a move like You know, let's say if the Marlins choose not to extend Sandy, there's almost do you think that that perception kind of becomes, oh well, what are they doing here, or is it, and I know that you can't in the front office can't operate based off of what the narrative is going to be, because you have to have a conviction in what you're doing, um, but almost in a way that you can kind of send a message around the league like, hey, listen, we want to contend, this is our guy. At what point is it balancing that and balancing, okay, but we need to address other needs?
Well, I mean, the bigger need at the moment is getting bats,
Right.
not signing someone who's already under control for 3 more years. You know, like that's
Right.
just if uh, that's just the reality of it. And I think, and then with free agents, if I was the Marlins, obviously you'd say, hey, look at the pitching staff we have, how many, and the depth that the organization has. How many other organizations can boast that? We're a lot closer than our record might indicate. And then you could also, if I was the Marlins, like tell free agents, hey, if you're getting maybe more dollar amounts elsewhere, remember that Florida has lower tax rate, so it might end up evening out. That's just a thought from my very limited, I guess, economic
No, those are
education, but
those are great points, Christina. And you have to sell what you have. What you
Right.
have in Miami is you could sell Miami. You could
exactly.
sell a controlled environment, meaning Lone Depot Park has retractable roofs, so you have game certainty. You could sell weather, and you could sell wanting to live in South Florida. I know Arizona has the same type of thing. It's an attractive market because players want to go and play there, but you also don't want to get guys who just want to go and live in Arizona or guys who just want to go and live in Florida. You got to get guys that have that burning desire to win, and you have a CEO in Derek Jeter who had that maybe more than anybody in his generation. And I would hope that you identify, and that's you talk to Castellanos. There's no BS. He wants to win, and not to say he's the only one, but you find that guy, that player that's going to be driven to win and try to make this market what everyone wants it to be, which is a baseball town, which is and so I think that's the balance. And Christina makes the point. You get the arms in here, maybe you get, you have to find a number you're comfortable with Sandy, but if you're going to sign Sandy to a number that prevents you from upgrading the arms, he just had a career year, and you didn't get where you
Right.
wanted to go. Um, then you do, if what would Tampa Bay do? What do? They move Blake Snell and go to the playoffs again. That's the reality. That's the business reality, and players know it. They play by it too. They go to where they feel they can get the dollar and the best opportunity to win. And I think you do have to sell that. I also agree with Christina. You probably have to trade for the catcher, with the understanding you're not getting JT Realmuto anymore. You're not getting the best catcher. That didn't work out here for whatever reasons. But so I found the Kirk name, Alejandro Kirk name, compelling. I know our friend Morosi was first on that, and because I think it makes sense, Christina. Because I think too, I don't think you move Sandy this year, whether you have an extension or not. And hopefully, you can get a deal worked out because you want him happy. But you do have Pablo, you do have Ellie Iser, and you do have other players that aren't necessarily pitchers who are ARB eligible, that you can move some of these players, get a catcher, even if it's a 100-game catcher. Hope Nick Fortes or some combination could help you get through. But your other parts of your offense are a lot better, and you're addressing catcher that way, and you're also moving ARB dollars, which you could allocate towards Castellanos, Escobar, Garcia, whoever you determine could be impactful bats for you.
Exactly. And with Alejandro Kirk, great name for the Lady Gaga fan in me. Um, what's interesting is, the under the assumption that there would be a universal DH next year, could the catcher, obviously he's a hit first catcher, but the catcher could technically be just like not a defensive specialist, but he could almost serve as like the pitcher of a lineup from
Exactly.
2022 moving on, right? So um, if that's the priority of getting a guy who's very good at handling a staff, which, in my opinion, if you're a very pitch first organization, that's very important. But also with like Alejandro Kirk, he's also 5 years of control left in a premium position. That would be huge.
I think, Christine, I think the knock on him, the perception knock, and you say, because we all read Twitter and see what social's saying. is the fact that he's like what 5'8", 260 or whatever.
260.
Yeah, it's like the body type. But I did my homework on it, and there's some people I know who are evaluators who really like the player, and that was enough for me. I will admit I haven't really seen him play, but I think that the body type stereotype shouldn't be the reason, because what'll happen if they get him and he produces, everyone will be loving the body type. They'll be,
Yeah.
he'll become a kind of a cult
Fan
figure.
favorite, cult
Yeah,
favorite.
be a
Yeah.
fan favorite immediately. But I'm looking at this as a legit player, not, I don't think that they should hold the 5'8", 260 and just say, oh my gosh, he's a left guard out there. And, that I think that's a little unfair to him. And, if, and I have to trust, because I do think that there's enough people in the organization that have a more realistic outlook of, look, we're not going to make this a Hail Mary pass season, which is the analogy I've used, where if it blows up, you're done for 10 years because you've traded away your prospects, you've oversold it, and you're bringing in free agents and then doing 2012 all over again, getting rid of them as quickly as you can, and then what's it going to look like? So I do think you have to be measured in how you get closer to 500 to really contend, because I think there are enough people in the organization that realize 23, 24, 25 are probably when everything should kick in gear if you just kind of stay the course. Obviously, you want to be close to 80 wins and 90 wins and then 100 losses. But I think there still needs to be some realistic expectations. But I just sense this. Oh my God! If they're not in the playoffs next year, it's all a disaster.
And you have to remember, right? 2020 set the organization and others as well, but back, because that was losing a year of development for prospect driven
Yeah,
Marlins, right?
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And speaking of prospect-driven Marlins, Joe, you were recently in Arizona covering the Mesa Solar Sox, who are going to be in the AFL Championship game. Obviously, we know Blade is on that team. He had a fantastic showing in the Fall Star game there. Uh, so just, I mean, it seems like it's shaping up to be a big fall for those two guys, JJ and Meisner, so far.
Yeah. There were four position players, a few relievers. Also Will Banfield is making strides there, but Will's a few years away, and he's a catch first guy, and Troy Johnston will give recognition to first base, left-handed hitter who's doing a fine job. But Meisner and Blade are the two, and Blade the numbers, and he hits the big homer and is the MVP of the Fall Star game, and great kid. We all love JJ. He's a real pro. I was fortunate to be able to talk to both those guys, and JJ talked about cleaning his swing path up, and just not to get too much into the weeds on the technical stuff, but he just didn't have a consistent approach all year in Double-A and was just kind of lost. And Meisner, I think the numbers overall may not be as great. I think he has Christine 7 homers or so in the fall
Something like
game.
half of his hits,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but there's a lot to like about Cam Meisner. And I personally think he's going to be a potential trade target because he's putting himself on a lot of radars. But I really wanted to mention this name, Phil Plantier, the hitting coach at AAA Jacksonville, who is part of the Mesa coaching staff. I think it was a really good move what the Marlins, development people did. They got Blade out there, and they put Phil out there, and they call him an added coach or whatever on these teams, but he's got hands on with Blade and Meisner and the others every day, and it's really done a lot to kind of smooth JJ's swing path. There was a little extra movements in there that created some issues, and whether JJ sustains that approach and can keep that way he's going. We're seeing bigger power. That's probably the most impressive thing I've seen. So, Christine? Obviously, your thoughts on Blade, your thoughts on how they're developing him, and Plantier. I mean, you had Jesus Sanchez with big strides this year. He started off in AAA. Lewin, we speak of, and a few other guys on that Jacksonville team.
Right, and that's been the knock, right, over the build is just the hitting prospects showing progress, and they did show it this year. Well, at least the Jesus Sanchez is even Lewin once he finally got everyday reps in the majors. It's interesting. I thought with JJ, obviously the mechanical stuff he changed, but how he said that things would snowball. Because whenever I've talked to him, he's very much like Pablo Lopez, where he analyzes everything. He's very much so like a thinker's. I don't know how to explain it, but the fact that he let it get to him, where it just, I'm sure, he got off to that slow start. Like, it's tough. No one played a 2020 minor league season. He did see some reps in spring training and looked like you saw it. Like, he had the good eye and this and that. But now he's, I guess, maybe got that fresh mind. He cleared everything out of his head, and now that he has that steady swing and stroke that yeah. I mean, that's the one thing, right, with the Arizona Fall League is we're seeing the hitting numbers are crazy up across the board. And we don't know if it's I think there's a new ball they're using, or if it's
and if there's not a lot of teams sent their top end hitters,
right, which of course goes back to
you
2020.
Max Meyer out there, and so
right.
But just the mechanics and the power and the things
you could still see.
Yes, there's strides and there's reason for encouragement, and I just like to give credit where it's due, and that's why I'm throwing Phil's name out there, and to the to the PD department of the Marlins, that they put JJ and Meisner too. I think I don't want to just seem like I'm neglecting him, because Meisner, a lot of people think this guy could be a big league regular.
Exactly, speed and pop.
Yeah, I saw him steal third base. He hit a double, and I was on the third base side to get the open side of the hitter when I was filming him. If I had any clue, then he hit leadoff and JJ hit third, and so I kind of had to be teed up for when JJ came to bat. But Meisner was on second, and he was right in front of me. I would have got a great video of him stealing third if I would have just been smart enough to think he was going to go. But just the jump, the read, and the ease he got there, I was like, and I'm watching, it's like he's running right at me. And I'm like, man, there's a lot to like Cameron Meisner. He's not getting the fanfare as obviously a Blade, but keep an eye on him. Whether he's trade bait, obviously you like to keep them all, your players, but if your trade bait means that you're opening up eyes. So
that, and then to get somebody, you need to give. You've got to give them it. Yeah,
exactly. You okay there, Eric?
Yeah. My connection's starting to get a little bit spotty. I apologize.
Okay. That's probably a good spot to end it on. Then we don't want any technical difficulties. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. Once again, I just want to thank Christina for being on with us. You guys can follow all of her work, as Joe mentioned, on Marlins.com as well as MLB.com. And you can follow her on Twitter at CDeNicola13. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Wiedeke. You can follow the show at ManOn2nd Baseball. You can also find this podcast as well as interviews, videos, things of that nature on the 5 Reasons Sports YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you next time.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Good seeing you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.